Thank you again for joining us at the Startup Society Foundation podcast. Today, we're joined by David Geeter, an ecopreneur and the bringer of new business to the Department of Economic Development and Commerce of Puerto Rico. David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Joe. I'm really grateful to be here and to talk about Puerto Rico's future. Thanks for having me.
Well, the honor is likewise, David. So tell me, first and foremost, what do you see as an ecopreneur? What is that?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, I know it's a newer term, and I hope to make it more prevalent. But the term really just looks at how do we utilize the tenets of entrepreneurship and looking at new value creation with the understanding of our sustainability and climate challenges, and incorporate that into the business models to generate both financial and environmental returns.
Excellent. So, what are some initiatives you're currently pursuing that follow sort of that ecopreneur framework?
Yeah, so what we're doing right now, Primary Productions has been a company, an impact design firm, and kind of interdisciplinary group of strategists that I've been working with over the years. We've been developing an integrated solution that we think is going to help close the climate investment gap, because currently there's zero tools that exist for early stage impact investors who want to see measurable returns on an ecological and social level, in addition to environmental, be able to project the impact of the projected climate impact from a market-based solution. So we really want to support other entrepreneurs that are in the social and environmental space, mainly in the environmental and clean energy, and this ranges from energy, water, food, and waste, if we look at just kind of core infrastructure needs for Puerto Rico, but also as impact markets. So we're providing a framework and tool set to be able to invest in those kinds of activities. And we think that Puerto Rico is a great place, is a perfect place to get started.
So, why do you think Puerto Rico is poised to become this hub for green entrepreneurship?
Well, it's a couple of things. I think that we're in a very fortuitous time, and there's different things that are coming together. But from like a ecological standpoint, islands represent model systems for sustainable development because they have clear measurable inputs and outputs, and there's like finite connected resources there. So you can really understand how, if we're going to look at a larger scale, this is planet ocean, and Earth is just our large islands. Our continents are large islands on the planet ocean. So when we look at an island ecosystem and how that operates and how it can be sustainable and resilient given its region, given its bioregion, its climate, and then of course its social and economic factors, there are really unique opportunities to kind of prove a model and create an example, if you will, of how to sustain that population. And then also when we think about economic growth and exporting opportunities for the island, how we move beyond just sustaining that, but actually having an economic base, a sustainable economic base that supports that allows us to export the goods that come from Puerto Rico as well. So there's that's kind of why the island model system really works when we think about the metrics that go into monitoring and measuring sustainable development and climate resilience. But also, given Puerto Rico's, one of the things that I do as a promoter of new business is to educate people on Act 20 and 22 as a way of providing new economic opportunities for the island to grow and bring new talent and grow its current talent base. And so when we think of a company like a renewable energy company, which may have like bigger costs up front to be able to invest in the infrastructure, and they have long-term benefits, when you have these special tax incentives provided by Act 2022, it really sweetens the ROI and portfolio of those companies, which kind of are on a longer return cycle, but that allows them to be able to have access to the resources they need, and then kind of the cash flow and revenue to continue to operate and grow their business and thus grow their impact. So I really believe that Puerto Rico, given its tax incentives as an island, and of course now the kind of bittersweet situation with Hurricane Maria. And my grandfather was actually was on the island during that time, and we were able to fortunately relocate him. But it really brought to light the urgency of reliable, sustainable infrastructure that is in alignment with more of a distributed model of the way in which it's serviced to the island. That way, there aren't too many centralized solutions that can be that can be compromised, and thus you have the continued situation we're in right now with this current power situation, and also kind of with the quality of available drinking water. There's a lot of things that are making a really immediate need and use case for sustainable development solutions.
So a lot of people in Puerto Rico right now, when they're talking about infrastructure, they're talking about resiliency. At the same time, they're talking about sustainability and how they feed into one another. In your view, how does sustainability relate to resiliency?
That's a really great question, and I'm glad you asked because it's something that kind of gets mixed up, and I utilize both terms just for familiarity. But really, when we look at the definition of like resilience, sustainability is a core component of that, and so is modularity, flexibility, and kind of a distributed nature of the resources or infrastructure you have. So it's less about robustness, which I feel like a lot of people think about when they're thinking of resilient to hurricanes, or flooding or things like that. And resiliency is actually more about flexibility, and I think that's where some of the exciting things with respect to decentralization and the way that we think about how kind of modular our infrastructure is, so that it can adapt, so that it can be flexible no matter where the disturbance comes from. Because resilience is all about the ability to adapt and respond to disturbance. And in fact, disturbance is supposed to aid in resiliency over time. So when we think about hurricanes, or we think about some of the climate challenges or resource challenges of the islands, those can be looked at as disturbances that actually create more resilience over time as we learn how to improve on that. So I'll just kind of go back into saying that resilience is fundamentally includes sustainability, because your infrastructure needs to be self-sufficient. There's also another word that gets thrown around into the mix here, and that's about like regenerative development, and that comes from the kind of the permaculture philosophy, and even just some of the deep ecology folks who are thinking, kind of talk about how, because nature operates on a cyclical basis, that if we create the use of our resources or our activities in a cyclical format as well too, we can actually start to create more infrastructure that can or at least business activities that can regenerate their value. So there's regeneration and sustainability, like distributed and modularity, and kind of that decentralization is all kind of part of the larger resilience picture. And that's kind of why we focus on that as an index value, is taking in all of these different components and these different data sets when we're thinking about the large scale resilience of the island, and baking in sustainability and distributed infrastructure as part of that overall resiliency plan. So that's my take on it. And you get a lot of mixed, there's a lot of conversation about defining that word. And I hope that by creating a shared agenda, which is our goal with Seed Exchange, is to be able to have that shared agenda and create that in an open way where this becomes more and more defined, because sustainability is not necessarily, and resilience are not necessarily set defined things. They're actually kind of like strange attractors, if you will, that are bringing us towards defining and advancing the science of sustainability to understand more and more how we can really respond to the ecological challenge and climate challenges that we have.
Can you let our viewers know what are some interesting projects on the ground in Puerto Rico that are operating in this distributed, resilient, renewable, modular type infrastructure that you've been talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in touch with a lot of cool people on the ground. A lot of there's kind of like a coalition, if you will, of energy providers, and contractors, and even data analysts as well, that are looking to establish some of the first microgrids and throughout different municipalities in Puerto Rico. And I think that energy is really the most simple way where this comes together and actually can be the backbone and foundation to, to the special economic tax zones that are possible in Puerto Rico, but also in the way that information is shared and stored and distributed as well has to do kind of really with the core energy. So in Puerto Rico right now, I'm aware of that there are kind of on the ground coalitions that are making starting the initial nodes of microgrid infrastructure, pretty much without waiting for regulation to change or waiting for kind of the current centralized energy monopoly on the island to figure itself out or go through its process of privatization and liquidation, things like that. So the need is immediate, and people are actively looking to set this up in core areas like in hospitals, and in rural and remote communities and small businesses as well, to kind of more center community nodes, so that the kind of the groundwork in terms of having this renewable energy and solar is part of that, but actually what I'm really excited about is seeing more micro hydro power in the more rural areas of Puerto Rico, which is actually getting to the same cost level in terms of efficiency for like kilowatt as solar is right now too, because we have a ton of rivers in Puerto Rico, and a ton of waterfalls and a lot of gravity to capture, if you will, a lot of potential energy. And so right now, because of the immediate need, there's kind of like brigades forming in terms of being able to set up examples and model systems for microgrid infrastructure. And I'm hoping to see more of that happen more in the water space. And of course, we're keen on supporting that. I think there are some exciting early stage technologies in the atmospheric water generation space, and also in advanced water filtration and Puerto Rico actually does have a decent amount of water that does come from the rain, and so being able to improve on capture methods and things like that will improve kind of the local resiliency of those resources. But from like a technological perspective, I think it's really exciting to see what's happening in the microgrid space, because it's promoting a more decentralized way of the people having their energy and being able to share that energy. I think the biggest exciting part is seeing the potential for cooperatives to form where the community is owning that energy, and the municipalities are hungry for it. There is with a kind of fiscal control board that is overseeing a lot of the changes on the island. There's kind of talk of that most likely the 76 or 78 municipalities that we currently have will be consolidated. So, I know that competition in terms of trying to get like the best infrastructure or create the best regulatory frameworks is really going to start to happen on a municipality level. And I think that that is kind of aligning right so in time with the network of microgrid service providers that are popping up on the island.
So you talked a little bit about regulatory environment and mentioned briefly about special economic zones. What are some ways, in your view, that a different regulatory environment or a tax environment in a special economic zone can help out these new green tech startups?
So I think this is a really interesting question, because what I've been thinking a lot about when we think about kind of land lease models for special economic zones is the development of kind of a city or urban infrastructure does have, and that kind of intensification on land space does have usually a negative implication for that land area, right? So it's really important to utilize special economic tax zones and bake in the metrics for sustainable development from the get-go, to actually change the rules of that emergent system. And we can do that, I think, by showing how might we actually enhance the natural resources and area around that special economic zone, and utilize that as challenges or impact challenges that are going to create opportunities for investing in those new green companies that are incorporating that into their business model, or creating products and services that support new building infrastructure, the way that I've done a lot of studying on bio design, which is kind of the intersection of how we learn from nature to actually build the infrastructure that supports us, and therefore has a less, if not a positive, impact on the environment. And when you create a regulatory framework that bakes in these types of resilient metrics or ecological health metrics, if you will, that really, I think, creates another layer of exciting challenge and opportunity from an impact entrepreneurship standpoint, because now you have you have a tangible and quantifiable way of improving that special economic zone. So I think, I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I kind of wanted to jump back to looking at how special economic zones impact land and natural resources, and showing that in the way that these the regulatory frameworks that provide land lease models can also bake in the metrics that make those parcels of lands or those sections of buildings more sustainable, more resilient, or actually more net positive from a climate and ecological standpoint. So I think that's the really exciting part that I want to be push for and see happen in Puerto Rico, because we just view the challenges of climate change and sustainability as pretty much like experiments in resilient design. These are opportunities for us to experiment in ways of designing these solutions. And when it comes to the climate investment gap, there's very little amounts of funding, both in a public and private sector, that are really fueling the kind of innovative activity that we need in a very fast pace. So that's the potential I see there for kind of creating a supportive structure for ecopreneurship to flourish.
I agree, and I just want to riff with you a little bit on combining land lease model with sustainable development. There's two ways that a land lease model can contribute to sustainable development. First is sort of the way that baked into the cake. The land lease model would have to be beneficial to the environment. What you could do is that the holder of the lease, the zone manager, when they're leasing out to developers, and those developers are leasing out to smaller property owners or leaseholders, they would have as part of the contract that they have to obey certain regulatory environments, and there could even be certain plots of land that would be zoned for certain purposes that cannot be zoned for, let's say, just like parking lots or something like that. So in that way, you can create as part of the contract to the developers, you can only develop in a certain way. But even if you don't do that, what you could possibly do is through the land lease system, because you're generating land leases, you're getting a lot of revenue. What you could simply say, especially if you tokenize this land revenue through the blockchain, you can have a certain amount of those shares or those tokens go to a sustainable and resilient development fund. And then you can have members of the community or venture capital fund allocate those funds towards projects on the island that can lead to sustainable development. So I think absolutely, you're right. You pointed to a really cool connection here on how startup society can help sustainable development.
Absolutely, and that's the potential I feel like that I've seen when I just learning a little more and being more involved in the startup community and understanding kind of how this, when we look at like the understory of commerce, if we use ecological metaphors to look at, I think it's funny how people talk about startup ecosystems without talking about ecosystems or understanding ecology. And I think that's kind of where part of this comes into play, is like really bringing the eco back in special economic tax zones, right? And I mean that in a very playful way, because I think it's an exciting way for folks to really to learn how Puerto Rico is very rich in its own resources, and there are many places like that all over the world that can kind of leverage the information that is available to how we're functionally dependent on these different ecosystems to support the kinds of support our own. And so I think that's definitely something that excites me about the conversation, and kind of bringing together the worlds of earth science and entrepreneurship. And I think that yes, I really do agree with the two different models that you pointed out. I think that with respect to kind of developing a green fund, I think that's definitely something that's pretty, I think, low-hanging fruit in terms of even just setting up from the beginning, but also like the initial investments that are going into any special economic zone. But then also from just holding accountability to the businesses that do operate. What you do have right now that hasn't really been upheld in some ways is just the way that environmental standards and regulations are accounted for and measured, and that system of accountability really has been pretty loose with respect to economic externalities from different business activities. So we think about just moving towards a more, radically transparent model, or a more, a data secure future where everything's out in the open, it's a really good opportunity when it comes to just environmental regulation and environmental innovation, to hold folks accountable to the kind of standards that this future special economic zone is trying to achieve.
So talking about that cross section that you mentioned with special economic zones and startups and ecology, you're going to be speaking at the Startup Society Summit, which is bringing together a consortium partners of those different fields together for the purpose of building sustainable cities. Tell me, why are you speaking, and why are you excited about speaking at the event?
Man, I am so excited to speak at this event. I think that it's a dream come true in a lot of ways, Joe. To be honest, I'm a child of the diaspora, and I've been living in Silicon Valley for the last 10 years. Just recently relocated to LA, and then relocating to Puerto Rico shortly after. But for me, I've had this kind of ongoing dream of seeing kind of the shortcomings of what wasn't really possible in Silicon Valley, of how to really take the heart of entrepreneurship and apply it in a way that's socially and environmentally meaningful. I think there's a lot of great intention out there, but not really a lot of room to make it happen. So I've been in that environment for a while, really, and I'd studied island ecology in Hawaii, and learned really how, kind of the core components of how we can look at islands as model systems, like I mentioned earlier. And so all of these things brewing. Over the last 2 years, I had been working, to position myself as a private sector partner to the Department of Economic Development and Commerce, the DDEC, and be a bridge to bring in those kinds of technological resources that I knew that Puerto Rico needed, to get out of the debt situation at the time, which now looks a little smaller than it does now in terms of just the overall challenge. But that was really focused on transitioning what was currently going on with the island and focusing on ecotourism as part of that. But now, ever since the hurricane, I feel like it's changed a lot of people's lives, and it's put Puerto Rico in the collective consciousness of the world, if you will. A lot of people think about Puerto Rico a lot more, and they're excited to see what's going to happen. They're frustrated too about what has happened so far. So I think that combination of sentiment, that the why Puerto Rico is a perfect place as a test bed, that we talked about earlier, and the fact that we have the potential to really activate the best and brightest to an area that can be a model system with scalable impact for the world. I mean, that really gets me going. Like, I'm really juiced about that because, when I was studying climate change and sustainable development, it's pretty easy to get depressed in with understanding the weight of the challenges that we have to overcome, and to understand that Puerto Rico, as a small island in its very cool, uniquely situated position, can really catalyze a larger shift with respect to the way that we utilize our environment, the way that we utilize our governance, and the way that we utilize currency. And that is really exciting to me, and that's why we want to really promote the seed as a token, as a token that bakes in those sustainable development metrics, and plant those seeds throughout Puerto Rico. So I'm really excited to speak more about that, and I'm excited to be in a group of like-minded individuals that this will be shared, especially to universities throughout Puerto Rico, that there are entrepreneurs that are coming from the island that are getting flown to the conference, and that this is happening in a very short period of time. And when we think about large-scale world challenges, it's a lot healthier and easier to focus on one small place, knowing that it's going to have that kind of impact. And that's why I'm really excited to really leverage all of my resources from out here in California and Silicon Valley, to really start something special in Puerto Rico and make it happen. And I'm excited for more people to just even visit and learn and see things for themselves about kind of how wonderful the island is, and the magic that it holds. But from like strictly just from a geeking out perspective of what we can really test and model and show to the world, it's pretty exciting. So
Perfect. David, I'm so excited to see you in DC, and then I'll be going to Puerto Rico afterwards. I love sharing time with optimistic people like yourself. Everyone, thank you for joining us at the Startup Society Foundation podcast. David, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to the future and see you guys at the conference.
Likewise.